I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I just stood there in my kitchen holding a dish towel and I said, very quietly, "You need to leave." I'm 64 years old, and I've learned that the loudest thing you can do sometimes is stay completely still. My name is Helen Archer. I live in Greensboro, North Carolina, in the same house I've owned for 31 years. I raised 2 children in this house. I buried a husband in this town, and for the last 9 years I have also raised my grandson Eli in this house, because my daughter decided when he was 4 years old that she couldn't do it anymore. I want to tell you what happened, all of it. My daughter's name is Amanda. She was 26 when Eli was born, and she was not prepared. I understood that. None of us are, really, the first time. But most of us don't have a choice once that baby is in the world. You figure it out. You lose sleep, you cry in the shower, you call your mother at 2 in the morning, and then you get back up and do it again. That's what mothers do. Amanda did that for about 8 months. Then the diagnosis came. Eli was evaluated just before his first birthday. The developmental pediatrician at Moses Cone Hospital sat across from us, me, Amanda, and her husband Ray, and she explained very gently that Eli showed significant markers for autism spectrum disorder. She said he was on the more profound end. She said early intervention was critical. She handed us a folder thick enough to be a textbook. Amanda didn't say a word in that office. She held Eli the whole time and stared at a point somewhere behind the doctor's left shoulder. Ray was already asking about costs. I drove home alone that evening and sat in my driveway for a long time. I thought about my daughter as a little girl, how she used to line up her shoes in perfect rows before bed. I thought about how much she'd always needed things to go a certain way. I thought about how hard this was going to be, and I thought, she's going to need help. I did not think she was going to leave. But she did. Not all at once. It happened the way a house settles, slowly, in ways you don't notice until something cracks. First, she stopped coming to Eli's therapy appointments. Then she started leaving him with me more and more, sometimes calling at 6 in the morning to say she wasn't feeling well. Then there were weeks at a time when I'd have Eli and barely hear from her. Ray left about 8 months after the diagnosis. He said he wasn't built for it, and I'll say this, at least he was honest about it. Amanda stayed legally present for another year or so, like a signature on a form, not a person in the room. The morning she actually left, really left, Eli was 3 years and 8 months old. She came to my house on a Thursday, dropped off 2 trash bags of his clothes, handed me a note she had written on the back of a grocery receipt and said, "Mom, I can't. I'm sorry. I can't." I looked at the receipt. It said, "Please take care of him. I'll call when I can." She drove away. Eli was sitting on my living room floor arranging coasters in a circle. He did that sometimes, made shapes, made patterns. He had a way of stacking things that was so deliberate it broke your heart a little. How much meaning he put into it. I stood at the door for a moment. Then I went and sat down beside him on the floor. "Okay," I said. Not to him, really, just to the room. "Okay." I filed for legal guardianship through the Guilford County courts. It took 4 months and cost me just over $2,000 in legal fees, money I pulled out of the account I'd been saving for a bathroom remodel. The judge asked me twice if I understood the full extent of what I was taking on. I said yes both times. He looked at me for a moment, then signed the paperwork. Eli's early years were not easy, and I won't pretend otherwise. He had meltdowns that could last 45 minutes. There were sensory sensitivities I had to learn, certain fabrics, certain sounds, the overhead lights in grocery stores. I had to retire earlier than I'd planned from my job as an office manager at an orthodontics practice because Eli needed me home and consistent and present. I restructured my entire life around his schedule, his therapies, his needs. But here is what I want you to understand. I never once resented him for it, not once, because Eli was not his diagnosis. Eli was a child who watched the Weather Channel for hours and could tell you barometric pressure the way other kids told you baseball scores. Eli was a child who, at age 7, taught himself to type because he found it easier than speaking, and then used that typing to leave me little notes on the kitchen counter. Just observations, really. The oak tree lost 4 branches last night. Wind speed was 34 miles per hour. I kept every single one of them. I have a shoebox in my closet. He started coding when he was 9. I didn't teach him. I didn't know how. He found tutorials on YouTube, and then he found forums, and then he found other kids online who liked what he liked. By the time he was 11, he was building small programs. By 12, he had taught himself Python. By 13, he was doing things on that computer I couldn't begin to understand, and I just kept making sure he had good internet, regular meals, and enough quiet. One night when he was 14, he came into the kitchen where I was doing a crossword puzzle, and he set his laptop down in front of me. On the screen was an application. Clean interface, soft colors. He had built a tool that helped nonverbal and minimally verbal people communicate using customizable visual symbol boards. He designed it with the flexibility to adapt to the user's specific patterns over time. He'd been working on it for almost 2 years without telling me. I looked at it for a long time. I looked at him. "Ellie," I said, "did you make this for yourself, for when you were little?" He didn't answer right away. He looked at the window the way he sometimes does when he's gathering words. Then he said, "I made it for kids who don't have someone who already learned to listen." I had to leave the room for a moment after that. I stood in the hallway and held my hand over my mouth and breathed. He submitted the application to a special education technology grant competition out of Chapel Hill when he was 15. He won. The grant was $40,000, which went into a custodial account in both our names. He used it to keep developing. He brought in a mentor through a program at NC State, a software engineer named Dr. Ose Boateng, who had worked with assistive technology for years and recognized immediately what Eli had built. By the time Eli was 16, Dr. Boateng had helped him formalize the intellectual property. They had filed the patents. They had interest from 3 different educational technology companies. When the licensing deal finally closed 7 months before Eli's 17th birthday, the number on the contract was $1.9 million, with royalty agreements that pushed the total projected value well past $2.5 million. I held that paperwork and I thought about a grocery receipt. "Please take care of him. I'll call when I can." She never called, not once in 9 years, until she did. It was a Tuesday in October. I was taking leaves off the front walk and my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't pick up. I'm glad I did because at least I had a few seconds to prepare before I heard her voice. "Mom," she said, "it's Amanda. I want to tell you that I was composed. I want to tell you I had some perfectly measured response ready. I didn't. I just held the rake and stared at the oak tree in my front yard, the one Eli had been recording wind damage on for years, and I said, 'Amanda.'" "I heard about Eli," she said. "I heard what he built." "How did you hear?" She paused. "It was in the news. The Chapel Hill thing. There had been a small feature, a local interest story that got picked up by a disability advocacy newsletter and then shared around. I had asked them not to use Eli's last name, and they had honored that. But his first name, his age, his city, his story, it was out there. "I'd like to see him," she said. "No," I said, and I hung up. I went inside and I told Eli that his mother had called. I didn't soften it or build up to it. He deserved to know directly. He was 17 years old and he had a right to the information about his own life. He sat with it for a minute. He was at the kitchen table with his laptop as usual. He didn't look up from the screen right away. Then he said, "What does she want?" "She says she wants to see you." He nodded slowly. "Okay. Okay, you want to see her, or okay, you heard me?" "Okay, I heard you," he said. "I don't want to see her right now." I respected that completely. She called 2 more times over the next 3 weeks. I let both go to voicemail. The messages were short. She said she just wanted to talk. She said she just wanted to talk. She said she changed. She said she thought about Eli all the time. I listened to both messages alone in my car, and I felt something I can only describe as grief that had already been grieved. Like finding an old scar and pressing on it. It still registered, but differently. Then the letter came. It was a legal letter from an attorney in Charlotte. I stood at my mailbox and read it twice, right there on the sidewalk, in my bathrobe, because I had gone out early and wasn't expecting anything. The letter stated that my daughter, referred to throughout as the biological mother, was requesting modification of the guardianship arrangement. It cited Eli's age, the financial assets now associated with his intellectual property, and her claim that she had undergone significant personal growth and was now in a stable position to be involved in his life and, specifically, in decisions related to his financial future. That last part, his financial future. I went inside, I sat at the kitchen table, and then I did something I hadn't done in years. I put my face down in my arms and I cried. Not for me, for Eli, because he had built something extraordinary out of years of work and focus and the particular brilliant way his mind moved through problems, and now the one person who had walked away from him was coming back with a lawyer and a claim. I called an attorney that afternoon. Her name is Patricia Graves, and she had been recommended to me by a woman in my church whose family had gone through a custody situation a few years back. Patricia was direct and clear, and she did not sugarcoat. "Your guardianship is solid," she said. 9 years, documented, uncontested. You have court records, school records, medical records. You have the grant documentation, the IP filing, all of it. His legal and financial structures are in order. "But," I said, because I could hear one coming, "but Eli is 17, not 18. Until he turns 18, there's technically a window where a biological parent can petition. It's a narrow window, and I think your position is very strong. But I want you to be prepared for the possibility that we go in front of a judge." "How long until he's 18? 7 months?" 7 months. I told Eli that evening. Again, directly. I sat down across from him and I told him his mother had hired a lawyer and what the letter said and what Patricia had told me. He was quiet for a long time. He closed the laptop. That's how I knew he was really listening, when he closed the laptop. "She wants control of the money," he said. "Not a question." "The letter talks about being involved in your financial future," I said. "Yes." He nodded. He looked at the table. Then he said something that I've turned over in my mind many times since. "She doesn't know I already thought about this." I asked him what he meant. "I've been building a record," he said, "for 2 years. Everything, all the communications with Dr. Boateng, all the development logs, the timestamps, the grant applications, the original concept files. I have all of it archived and dated and stored in 3 places. I have the code commits with timestamps going back to when I was 12. There is a complete documented history of exactly who built what and when and how and why. My name is on every single piece of it." He looked at me then directly, which he didn't always do. "She can come to court," he said. "I'll just let her talk." I stared at my grandson, this 17-year-old boy who had been labeled and underestimated and left, and I felt something settle in my chest. Something that had been tight for weeks, maybe for years, just settled. "Okay," I said, for the second time in his life, sitting across from him in this kitchen. "Okay." The hearing was scheduled for late January in the Guilford County Courthouse before Judge Anita Coleman. Amanda arrived with her attorney, a man from Charlotte who wore a very nice suit and had the practiced confidence of someone accustomed to talking his way into things. I arrived with Patricia, and Eli came with me, which he did not have to do but chose to. Amanda saw him in the hallway outside the courtroom. I watched her face when she registered how tall he had gotten, how he carried himself. She took a step toward him. He looked at her with an expression I can only describe as neutral. Not cold, not warm, just clear, like a window with nothing behind it you could lean on. "Hi, Eli," she said. "Hi," he said. That was all. Inside, her attorney made his case. He spoke about the bonds of biological parenthood. He used phrases like the child's best interests and a mother's natural role and the substantial assets now at stake. He suggested that the guardianship, established when Eli was a young child with significant needs, was no longer the appropriate structure now that Eli was on the verge of adulthood and had demonstrated remarkable capability. He was good. I'll give him that. He was polished and he hit every note. Then Patricia presented our response. 9 years of documented care, medical records, school IEP files, therapy logs, tax returns showing my expenditures on Eli's behalf, letters from his therapists, his teachers, Dr. Boateng, a letter from Eli himself, which he had written without my prompting, 2 pages, single-spaced, factual and clear, describing his own development, his work, his relationship with me, and his wishes regarding his future. And then the exhibit that Patricia called the Developmental Archive, Eli's own documented record of his work, code repositories with timestamps, grant applications, patent filings, communications, a complete, verifiable chronological record proving that every element of the intellectual property had originated with and been built by Eli, with Dr. Boateng as a documented mentor and with no involvement, financial or otherwise, from his biological mother at any point. Her attorney didn't have much to say after that. Judge Coleman looked at the documents for a long time. Then she looked at Amanda. "Miss Archer," she said. Amanda had taken back her maiden name. "I have before me a record of 9 years of consistent, documented, court-supervised guardianship by this child's maternal grandmother. I have before me the child's own statement, clearly articulated, regarding his wishes. I have before me a complete financial and intellectual property record that leaves no ambiguity about the origin of the assets in question." She paused. "What I do not have before me is any documentation of your involvement in this child's life in the past 9 years. Can you point me to any?" Amanda's attorney leaned over and whispered something to her. She shook her head slightly. "No, Your Honor," she said. Her voice was barely audible. "Petition denied," Judge Coleman said. We walked out of that courthouse into a January afternoon that was cold and sharp and bright. Eli walked beside me on the sidewalk, and we didn't say much for a few minutes. I was holding Patricia's card in my hand, squeezing it without realizing it. After a while, Eli said, "Are you okay?" I laughed a little. "Are you okay?" He considered this the way he did. "I think so," he said. "I think I've known for a long time that she wasn't coming back for me. She came back for what I built." I didn't argue with him. He was right, and he knew it. And the last thing he needed was someone softening that truth for him when he had already made his peace with it. "What she didn't understand," he said, "is that what I built is inseparable from who I am. You can't take one without the other, and she gave up the other a long time ago." We drove home. I made chicken and rice, Eli's preferred Tuesday dinner, and we ate together, and he told me about a new module he was developing, something about adaptive audio cues. And I listened and asked questions I barely understood, and he answered them with the patience he had always shown when explaining his world to me. That night, after he went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. I thought about a lot of things. I thought about the grocery receipt I still had in a drawer somewhere. I thought about the shoebox of notes in my closet. I thought about a judge's signature on a guardianship form and what it had cost and what it had given back. I thought about what Eli had said in this same kitchen weeks earlier. I made it for kids who don't have someone who already learned to listen. I had not done anything spectacular. I had not been a hero. I had just showed up every single day for 9 years and learned to listen. That was the whole of it. That was everything. He turns 18 in August. In September, he starts at NC State. He was accepted into their computer science program with a specialized accommodation plan developed over 6 months in collaboration with the Disability Services Office. He will be the youngest student in his cohort and, I suspect, one of the sharpest. On the morning the acceptance letter came, he printed it out and left it on the kitchen counter. Under it, he had placed a small sticky note in his careful, even handwriting. "We did this," it said. "I put it in the shoebox." I keep coming back to that shoebox in my closet. Not the court documents, not the guardianship papers. The shoebox. The one full of little notes Eli left me on the kitchen counter over the years. Wind speeds, temperature readings, observations about the oak tree. Small, careful sentences that told me everything about who he was and how his mind worked, long before the world had any language for it. People talk about cause and effect like it's something that happens to you, but I've lived long enough now to understand that it runs the other direction too. That the choices you make, quietly, alone, with no one watching and no guarantee of anything, those choices compound. They build into something. You just don't always get to see what until much later. Amanda made her choice when Eli was 3 years old. I made mine the same morning, sitting down on the floor beside him while he arranged coasters in a circle. Neither of us knew in that moment what those choices would mean 17 years later in a courthouse in Guilford County, but they meant everything. What I want people to understand, and I say this as someone who is not a perfect person, who made mistakes raising my own daughter that I've had to sit with, is that doing right by someone is not a grand gesture. It's not a single moment of heroism. It is the relentless, unglamorous choice to show up again tomorrow when you showed up today and it was hard. It's getting to Eli's therapy appointment at 7 in the morning when you haven't slept. It's learning what fabrics feel wrong against his skin. It's sitting at a kitchen table at 61 years old, listening to a 17-year-old explain a programming concept you'll never fully understand and asking questions anyway, because the asking is what tells him he matters. That's what I mean when I think about character. Not the dramatic version, the daily version. And Eli, what he built was not just an application. It was the product of a mind that had been allowed to develop on its own terms, without someone trying to force it into a shape it wasn't made for. He is the most intellectually honest person I have ever known. He does not exaggerate. He does not perform. He documented 2 years of work with the same precision he brought to recording wind damage on that oak tree, because accuracy mattered to him the way breathing matters to the rest of us. That is the kind of intelligence that cannot be faked and cannot be bought, and it is exactly what protected him in that courtroom. But it was his steadiness that undid me most. When Amanda's attorney was laying out his case, Eli sat beside me without fidgeting, without anger, without any of the performance you might expect from a teenager in that situation. He had prepared. He had done what needed to be done, and he was willing to let the truth speak without helping it along. I think about that a lot. The discipline it takes to stay quiet when someone is misrepresenting you. To trust that the record you built will hold. That is not passivity. That is the hardest kind of strength there is. What Amanda came back for was money. What she found instead was a wall of evidence built by a boy she had written off. That is not luck. That is consequence. Choices accumulate, the ones you make and the ones you don't, and eventually the accounting comes due. Eli starts at NC State in the fall. I'll drive him there myself. And I'll come home to a quieter house and a kitchen counter with no notes on it. And I'll probably stand there for a minute and feel all of it at once. But that shoebox isn't going anywhere.